Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the most feared name in hero history. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air on the rooftop was thin and cold, a stark contrast to the fire that had been raging in Izuku Midoriya's chest only moments before. Now, that fire was gone, leaving behind nothing but a hollow, echoing chamber of ash. The wind whipped around the corners of the building, tugging at the edges of his uniform, its mournful whistle the only sound that seemed to reach him. The sprawling cityscape below, a vibrant tapestry of light and life that had always filled him with boundless hope, now seemed like a cruel joke, a world of infinite possibilities for everyone but him. He could still see him, the silhouette of his idol, his god, shrinking against the horizon. All Might. The symbol of peace. The man whose smile could save thousands. The man who had just taken Izuku's soul, placed it between two calloused, powerful hands, and crushed it into dust. "No, I don't think you can be a hero without a quirk." The words were not shouted. They were not delivered with malice or contempt. They were spoken with a weary sort of pragmatism, the tired voice of a man who had seen too much reality to entertain a child's fantasy. And that, somehow, made it so much worse. It wasn't a villain telling him he was worthless. It was the world's greatest hero confirming it as an unchangeable fact. Izuku's hands, white-knuckled, gripped the cold metal safety railing. His knuckles were bone white, the only color left in his world. He remembered the feeling of All Might's hand on his shoulder, a brief, almost apologetic pressure before he turned to leave. He remembered the puff of steam, the skeletal form, the story of the wound and the fading embers of One for All. He'd been shown the hero's vulnerability, a sacred secret, only to then be told his own dream was an impossibility. It was a unique and exquisite form of torture. Be realistic, the hero had advised, his voice still echoing in the frozen space of Izuku's mind. Realistic. For 10 years, his reality had been a constant barrage of mockery and pity. Quirkless. Useless. Deku. Bakugo's sneering face swam in his vision, the explosions popping in his palms, the smell of burnt sugar. "If you want to be a hero so bad, why don't you take a swan dive off the roof and pray for a quirk in your next life?" His gaze drifted downward, over the railing, to the dizzying drop. The cars below were tiny, metallic insects crawling along veins of asphalt. The people were specks of dust. It would be so easy, a single moment of letting go. A final, desperate prayer. For a moment, a terrifying, seductive moment, the thought wasn't just a memory of a taunt. It was an option, a quiet, final solution to a problem that had no other answer. His dream was dead. What was the point of the dreamer? He felt a tear, hot and traitorous, escape his eye and trace a cold path down his cheek. It was a tear of utter, bottomless despair. He had held on to a single, flickering candle of hope in a hurricane of doubt, and All Might himself had been the gust of wind that finally extinguished it. Boom! The sound was distant, but it vibrated through the soles of his worn red sneakers. A concussive thud that was more felt than heard. It was the familiar punctuation of their superpowered society, the sound of a villain making their presence known. Normally, that sound would have sent a jolt of adrenaline and feverish excitement through him. He would have been scrambling for his notebook, his mind already racing, analyzing, hypothesizing. He would have been running towards the sound. Today, he didn't move. He just lifted his head, his tear-streaked face a mask of numb apathy. A plume of black smoke was rising a few blocks away, staining the otherwise perfect blue sky. Another villain, another hero would show up. People would be saved. The world would keep turning. Just not for him. He was no longer a part of that story. He was just an audience member, and a pathetic one at that. He let go of the railing, his arms falling limply to his sides. He should go home. He should go home and take down the posters, pack away the action figures, burn the notebooks. He should accept the gray, mundane, quirkless life that was his sentence. But his feet wouldn't move. Instead, they carried him, shuffling and aimless, not down the stairs, but towards the edge of the roof facing the commotion. He found a fire escape on the adjoining building, descending one level to a grimy, forgotten ledge that offered a clearer, unobstructed view of the street below. He sank down, his back against the cold brick, hidden from the world, a ghost watching a play he could never join. The scene below was chaos, but a familiar kind of chaos. It was the same shopping district he and his mother frequented. And in the center of it, writhing and expanding, was the sludge villain, the very same one All Might had saved him from not an hour ago. The bottles in the hero's pocket, they must have fallen out when Izuku had so selfishly, so stupidly, latched onto his leg. This was his fault. The thought didn't bring a spike of guilt. It was a dull, heavy stone sinking into the already cold pit of his stomach. Another failure to add to the list, and the villain had a hostage. A boy with spiky, ash-blonde hair, thrashing, fighting, setting off explosions that only seemed to make the sludge churn more violently. Kaken. Izuku's breath hitched. Bakugo was suffocating. His childhood friend, his tormentor, the explosive, arrogant boy who had defined so much of his life, was dying. And the heroes were doing nothing. Death Arms stood there, his powerful arms useless against a liquid opponent. Kamui Woods was evacuating civilians, his wood-based quirk a fatal liability against the fires Bakugo's desperate explosions were starting. Backdraft was trying to contain the flames, but his water screen was too wide, his attention divided. They were all there, all the pros, and they were failing. Izuku's analytical mind, a curse and a gift he couldn't turn off, began to whir, but not with excitement. It was cold, detached, and increasingly angry. Death Arms is a close-quarters powerhouse. Useless against a fluid enemy that can't be punched. He's just crowd control. Kamui Woods is a capture specialist, but he's weak to fire. The hostage himself is a walking incendiary device. Incompetent matchup. Backdraft is a rescue hero, not a combatant. He's mitigating damage, not neutralizing the threat. They are waiting. Waiting for what? For someone with the right quirk? How long will they wait? Bakugo doesn't have that long. The apathy that had coated his heart began to crack. And underneath, it wasn't despair. It was not the familiar ache of sadness or the sting of self-pity. It was something new, something hot and black and sharp. It was rage, a pure, undiluted fury that started in his belly and spread like wildfire through his veins. He watched as they held the line, their faces masks of grim professionalism, but their actions screamed impotence. They were posturing. They were managing a crisis, not solving it. They were protecting their public image, ensuring the collateral damage was minimal, while a teenage boy choked to death in plain sight. He felt the phantom urge, the instinct that had defined his entire being, to run. To throw his backpack, to do something, anything, to create an opening. But it was different this time. The urge was there, but it was pinned down by the crushing weight of All Might's words. You can't be a hero, and for the first time, he saw it not as a condemnation of himself, but as a condemnation of the word hero. If these were the heroes, the ones with the power, the fame, the licenses, and they stood by and let someone die because it was inconvenient or difficult or didn't fit their specific skill set, then what was a hero? A brand? A job title? A celebrity endorsement? The rage burned brighter. It was a righteous, terrible fire consuming the last vestiges of the sobbing Fanda. His fists clenched, his nails digging so hard into his palms that he felt the skin break. A thin trickle of blood, warm and real, ran down his fingers. The pain was grounding. It focused the inferno in his soul into a single, piercing point of clarity. They were fakes. The word echoed in his mind, sharp and clear as a bell. They weren't heroes. They were performers, playing a role for fame and fortune. They smiled for the cameras and signed autographs, but when faced with a situation that was truly messy, truly dangerous, they hesitated. They waited for someone better, and All Might, the greatest of them all, had just told him that this broken, fraudulent system was the only way. That to be a hero, you had to be born with the tools for the job, like a carpenter born with a hammer for a hand. The despair was gone. The sadness was a distant memory. In their place was a terrifying, empowering cold. The cold of a shattered idol. The cold of a faith that had been utterly and irrevocably broken. He wasn't looking at heroes and a villain anymore. He was looking at a pack of incompetent cowards and a victim they were allowing to die. He didn't notice the subtle shift in the shadows behind him. He didn't hear the whisper-soft scrape of a boot on brick. He was completely consumed by the crucible of his own fury, his green eyes glowing with an intensity that had nothing to do with any quirk. "You see it too, don't you, boy?" The voice was a low rasp, like stones grinding together. It was rough, but carried a strange, hypnotic cadence. Izuku flinched, spinning around, his heart lurching into his throat. He was no longer alone on the ledge. A man stood there, impossibly tall and gaunt, draped in black and gray. A tattered red scarf, long as a river of blood, was wrapped around his neck and face, obscuring everything but his eyes. And those eyes, they were small, dark, and utterly fanatic, burning with the same righteous fire that had just been born in Izuku's own soul. His body was a tapestry of blades, katanas on his back, knives strapped to his thighs, his arms, his chest. He was a living weapon. Izuku knew who he was. He had seen the news reports, the grainy security footage. The man who had crippled and killed 17 heroes and evaded capture every time. The hero killer, Stain. Izuku's blood ran cold. He scrambled backwards, pressing himself against the brick wall, his mind screaming, "Danger! Villain! Run!" But his body was frozen. Stain didn't move towards him. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply tilted his head, his gaze fixed on Izuku, then flicking back to the chaos below. "I have been watching this farce for 10 minutes, Stain rasped, his voice dripping with contempt. "I was considering which of them to kill first. Death Arms, perhaps. All brawn and no conviction. Or the tree man, so easily rendered useless. But then, I sensed something else. Up here." His dark eyes found Izuku's again, and they held a terrifying sort of understanding. Not fear. Not morbid curiosity. Pure, unadulterated judgment. "You were weighing them. And you found them wanting. I can see it in your eyes. That is the same fire that burns in me." Izuku couldn't speak. His throat was a knot of terror and confusion. Stain gestured with a bandaged hand towards the street. "Look at them. Fakes. Every last one. They call themselves heroes, but they are nothing but parasites clinging to a broken system. They are motivated by money. By fame. They are not worthy of the name." He was voicing the very thoughts that had just been screaming through Izuku's head, but with a conviction forged over years of bloodshed. "They stand there, waiting for someone with the right quirk while a child suffocates," Stain continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They value procedure over life. They value their own safety over their duty. They are a disease. A rot that has infested the very heart of society." Izuku stared at him, mesmerized. This was a villain. A murderer. But his words resonated with the new, harsh truth that had just been seared into Izuku's soul. He wasn't wrong. From this vantage point, watching Bakugo's struggles weaken, watching the heroes maintain their pathetic cordon, Izuku couldn't find a single flaw in the killer's logic. "But you," Stain said, taking a slow, deliberate step closer. Izuku flinched, but didn't run. "You are quirkless, aren't you?" Izuku's eyes widened. How could he know? "I can tell," Stain said, a grim smile touching the edges of his visible mouth. "There is a stillness about you. A desperation. The mark of the world's scorn. And yet you have the eyes of a true hero. The eyes of someone who understands that justice is not about a flashy debut or a high approval rating. It is about results. It is about purging the wicked." Suddenly, down below, something changed. A figure, small, fast, and utterly foolish, burst from the crowd. It was All Might, in his skeletal form, rushing towards the fray. He couldn't do anything, not in that state. He was just as useless as the rest. No, wait, he wasn't attacking. He was running towards the crowd, a look of desperate searching on his face. He was looking for someone. He was looking for Izuku. A wave of nausea and disgust washed over Izuku. The hero who had crushed his dream was now looking for him. For what? To offer a platitude? An apology? It was too late. The damage was done. The idol was shattered. "He is the worst of them all," Stain hissed, his gaze following Izuku's to the skeletal figure of Tashinori Yagi. The symbol of peace. A pillar of lies propping up this entire corrupt institution. He sells a fantasy of effortless victory, a world where a smile is all you need. He inspires not true heroism, but a generation of complacent fame-seekers who believe they can do the same. Stain turned his full attention back to Izuku. The intensity in his gaze was like a physical force. My path is one of blood. I cull the fakes, hoping that from the fear, true heroes will rise. But it is a slow, messy process. I am a surgeon performing amputations with a rusty blade. But you could be different. He took another step. He was close now, the smell of iron and antiseptic clinging to him. You have the spirit, the conviction, the rage. But you lack the tools. You believe you are powerless. You are wrong. A quirk is a crutch. It makes these fakes lazy. True power comes from the body, the mind, and the will. A will to see justice done, no matter the cost. Stain paused, letting his words sink into the desperate, fertile ground of Izuku's broken heart. I can teach you, he said, his voice dropping low and serious. Not to kill. That is my burden, my stain to bear. I will teach you to be what this world truly needs. Not another smiling symbol for the cameras, but a symbol of fear for the wicked. A name that makes villains tremble in their boots. A force so efficient, so brutal, so absolute in its justice that criminals would rather turn themselves in than face you in a dark alley. I will teach you to be a weapon. I will forge you into the one true hero this rotten world has been crying out for. The offer hung in the air, electric and terrifying. It was everything Izuku had ever wanted, twisted into a shape he had never imagined. To be a hero. To save people. Stain wasn't offering him a path of villainy. He was offering him a different, darker path to the same goal. A path forged not in hope, but in fear. A path that didn't require a quirk, only an unbreakable will. Izuku looked down at his own bleeding hand, then back at the scene below. He saw the useless heroes. He saw Bakugo, now limp and barely conscious in the villain's grasp. He saw the skeletal All Might, lost and powerless in the crowd. And he heard the echo of that final, dream-killing word. No, All Might had closed the door. Stain was offering him a key to a different one. A door that led through darkness, but a door that led somewhere. A purpose. His old dream was dead, a mangled corpse on a lonely rooftop. But a new one, a terrible and cold and resolute purpose, was being born from its ashes. If the world wouldn't let him be a hero who inspires hope, he would become a hero who instills terror. He would become the justice the fakes were too weak to deliver. He looked up, meeting the hero killer's fanatic gaze. The tears were long gone, burned away by the fury. His voice, when it came out, was not the trembling squeak of a boy. It was quiet, hoarse, and chillingly steady. I will. A flicker of triumph, sharp and predatory, sparked in Stain's eyes. He gave a curt nod. Good. The world is a dark and filthy place. It is time we started cleaning it. He glanced down as, finally, the muscle-bound form of All Might reappeared, scattering the sludge villain with a single, weather-changing punch. The crowd roared. The cameras flashed. The symbol of peace stood victorious, smiling for the cameras. Izuku watched, but he felt nothing. No awe. No relief. Only a profound, icy contempt. The hero had arrived, just in time for the cameras. Your training begins tonight, Stain rasped, turning away. Forget your name. Forget your weakness. Your past is ash. We have work to do. He moved with silent grace, melting back into the shadows of the cityscape as if he were a part of them. An abandoned warehouse. Koto Ward, District 4. Midnight. Do not be late. His voice was the last thing Izuku heard before he was once again alone, the sounds of cheering and sirens rising from the street below like noises from another world. He did not go home. He did not go to the police to report his encounter with a wanted killer. He walked through the city like a ghost, the events of the day replaying in his mind not as a trauma, but as a lesson. Rejection. Incompetence. Validation. Purpose. By the time the moon hung high and pale in the ink-black sky, Izuku Midoriya was standing before the rusted, groaning gates of a derelict warehouse in the city's forgotten industrial sector. The building was a skeleton of steel and corrugated iron, its windows like vacant eyes. It smelled of decay, rust, and stagnant water. It was a tomb. He pushed open the heavy door, the screech of metal on metal echoing in the cavernous space. Inside, a single bare bulb hanging from a wire cast a sickly yellow glow over a small patch of the concrete floor. In the center of the light stood Stain, his arms crossed, his collection of blades glinting. "You came," Stain said. It wasn't a question. "Good. Punctuality is a form of discipline." Izuku said nothing, his gaze sweeping the empty space. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone, but his face was a stony mask. Stain walked a slow circle around him, his analytical eyes raking over Izuku's small, scrawny frame. "You are weak. Malnourished. Your posture is pathetic. You carry yourself like a victim. We will burn all of that away." He stopped in front of Izuku, close enough for the boy to see the manic glint in his eyes. "Your first lesson is not about combat," Stain declared, his voice hard as the concrete beneath their feet. "It is about mentality. Your empathy, your tears, your hesitation, these are not virtues. They are liabilities. A hero who weeps for the enemy is a hero who will be killed by him. A hero who hesitates for 1 second is a hero who lets a civilian die. You will purge these weaknesses from your soul until all that remains is the objective." He pointed a bandaged finger at Izuku's chest. "You are no longer a boy. You are a tool. A scalpel to carve the cancer from society. And a scalpel does not feel. It only cuts." Stain stepped back, gesturing to the vast, dark expanse of the warehouse. "You will run. From that wall to this one. You will not stop until I tell you to. You will run until your lungs burn and your legs give out. And when you fall, you will get up and run more. You will run until the part of your brain that wants to cry, that wants to quit, that wants to go home, dies. You will kill the Deku inside you. Do you understand?" Izuku looked at the far wall, barely visible in the oppressive darkness. It seemed a mile away. His body was already aching from the day's stress. He was exhausted. The old him would have already been crying, stammering apologies for his own weakness. But the old Izuku was a shattered idol, his pieces scattered on a lonely rooftop. He took a steadying breath, the foul air filling his lungs. He met Stain's gaze, his own green eyes reflecting the dim, ugly light. There was no fear in them now. Only a cold, hard, terrifying emptiness. "I understand," he said, and then he ran. His worn red sneakers slapped against the grimy concrete, the sound echoing in the silent, cavernous tomb where Izuku Midoriya had come to die, and something else, something far more fearsome, was about to be born. The first of many brutal nights had begun, each one a hammer blow, shattering the boy to forge the weapon. 10 months. 300 days of agony and rebirth. The warehouse that had once been a tomb had become a forge, and Izuku Midoriya was the metal being hammered into a new and terrible shape. The air was thick with the coppery scent of blood and the sharp tang of sweat. A wooden bow staff whistled, a barely audible hiss slicing through the gloom, aimed directly at Izuku's head. He didn't flinch. He didn't dodge. He dropped, his body falling bonelessly to the floor as the staff passed harmlessly over him. In the same fluid motion, he swept his leg out, aiming for his opponent's ankle. Stain, moving with a supernatural grace that defied his gaunt frame, simply hopped over the sweep. Before Izuku could recover, the end of the staff slammed down into the meat of his shoulder, driving him flat against the concrete. A jolt of white-hot pain shot through him, but he didn't cry out. Sound was a weakness. It signaled pain, and pain was information for the enemy. Sloppy! Stain's rasp echoed in the vast, empty space. "You anticipated the head strike, but you assumed I wouldn't counter your counter. Assumption is the mother of defeat. It is a luxury afforded only to the overwhelmingly powerful. You are not that. You are a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Precision, boy." "Always." Izuku pushed himself up, his left arm protesting with a dull, throbbing ache. His breathing was even, controlled. The boy who would have dissolved into tears from a paper cut was long dead. This new Izuku had learned to compartmentalize pain, to file it away as data. Impact point, upper trapezius. Result, deep tissue bruising, temporary motor function impairment in the left arm. Tactical adjustment, favor right side, protect the left until function returns. He was no longer the scrawny, soft boy from the rooftop. The 10 months of hellish training had stripped away every ounce of baby fat, replacing it with lean, corded muscle. His frame was still slight, but it was dense, coiled like a spring. His skin, once pale and freckled, was now a road map of pale, thin scars. A silvery line on his forearm from a missed knife block in the 3rd month. A small, puckered mark on his cheek where Stain had punished a moment's hesitation with the blunt pommel of a dagger. Each scar was a lesson, etched into his flesh so he would never forget. His hair was longer, unkempt, casting shadows over eyes that had lost their childlike width and wonder. Now they were narrow, constantly scanning, analyzing. They were the eyes of a predator, cold and calculating. Again, Stain ordered, spinning the staff in his hand. They fell back into the rhythm of combat. It was less a spar and more a brutal, unending drill. Stain was not teaching Izuku how to win a fight. He was teaching him how to end one. He taught him the body's vulnerabilities, the nerve clusters in the neck and joints, the precise amount of force needed to dislocate a shoulder without breaking the bone, the fastest way to shatter a kneecap to permanently neutralize a runner. He taught him how to use a knife not to kill, but to sever tendons. He taught him how to move through shadows, to make his footsteps silent, to use the environment as a weapon. But the physical training was only half of it. The true transformation was mental. Every night, after his body was a trembling mass of bruises and exhaustion, the psychological conditioning would begin. Stain would make him watch footage, grainy security cams, villain blogs, hacked herocoms, of pro-heroes failing. Observe. Stain would rasp, pointing to a clip of a popular hero showboating for the cameras while a purse snatcher escaped down an alley. Vanity. His objective was not justice, it was screen time. He is a fake. He would show Izuku crime scene photos, not for clues, but for tactical analysis. The villain entered through the roof. The hero team set up a perimeter on the ground floor, a fatal error in spatial assessment. They reacted to the situation, they did not control it. All dead. Incompetent. He forced Izuku to burn his old notebooks. The ones filled with adoring fan art and gushing praise. This is idol worship, Stain had sneered, tossing a hero analysis for the future No. 13 into a flaming oil drum. You cannot analyze a subject you deify. You must dissect them. Find their weaknesses. Their vanities. Their dependencies. See them not as heroes, but as flawed opponents. In their place were new notebooks. Black, spiral-bound, and filled with a chillingly detached script. The entries were no longer about costume design or ultimate moves. Endeavor, quirk, hell flame. Over-reliance on overwhelming firepower. Limited utility in situations requiring subtlety or non-combustible solutions. Psychological profile, egomaniacal, obsessed with surpassing all might. This obsession can be exploited. Easily provoked. Collateral damage is a feature of his work, not a bug. Inefficient. Best genist, quirk fiber master. Highly effective for capture and restraint, but requires a source of denim. Nullified by fire or cutting attacks. His composure is a mask. Attacks on his aesthetic or public image may provoke uncharacteristic errors. And on it went, a catalogue of weaknesses. He wasn't studying heroes anymore. He was studying targets. The hardest lesson had been the purging of his empathy. In the beginning, Izuku would instinctively try to help during their field exercises, real-world excursions into the city's dark underbelly. He'd see a mugging and want to rush in. Stain would stop him, a hand like a vice on his shoulder. Wait. Observe. What is the mugger's goal? The woman's purse. Izuku would whisper. And what is the hero's objective? To save her. To stop him. Wrong. Stain would correct, his voice a low growl. The objective is the permanent cessation of the threat. Saving the purse is incidental. Saving the woman is the priority, but letting the mugger escape to do this again tomorrow is a failure. You do not stop him. You end him as a threat. Then they would descend, a blur of shadows. Stain would have Izuku practice, a quick, silent takedown. A dislocated elbow, a shattered ankle, enough pain to be a deterrent for life, delivered with the cold efficiency of a surgeon. No words. No heroic speeches. Just a broken criminal left writhing in an alley, a permanent lesson delivered. At first, Izuku had been sick. The sounds of bones popping, the whimpers of pain, it had all churned his stomach. But Stain was relentless. Did he die? No. Will he rob someone tomorrow? No. Then the objective was met. Your feelings are irrelevant. Slowly, painfully, the empathy had been cauterized. It was still there, a phantom limb that ached on quiet nights, but it no longer governed his actions. His actions were governed by one thing, and one thing only, the mission. Justice through fear. Order through pain. He was a weapon now, honed in the darkness. And he was almost ready. Guilt was a poison. For 10 months, Toshinori Yagi had been slowly dying from it. It wasn't the gaping wound in his side that ached the most these days. It was the hollow space in his conscience where a bright-eyed, green-haired boy used to be. Every night, he saw those eyes, first filled with a desperate, shining hope. Then, shattered into a million pieces by his own careless, pragmatic words. No, I don't think you can be a hero without a quirk. He had spent a lifetime making hard choices, but that one was a mistake of catastrophic proportions. He hadn't just crushed a dream, he had broken a boy. And then, the boy had vanished. Inko Midoriya had filed a missing persons report 3 days after their encounter on the roof. The police investigation had gone nowhere. No signs of foul play, no ransom note, just a note on Izuku's desk that read, "I'm sorry," and an empty room stripped of every last piece of All Might merchandise. Toshinori, in his skeletal form, had visited the Midoriya apartment once, with his friend on the police force, Detective Naomasa Tsukachi. The grief in Inko's eyes was a physical thing, a crushing weight in the small, tidy apartment. She had looked at him, a strange, gaunt man accompanying the detective, with a raw, pleading desperation that twisted the knife in his gut. He was the cause of this, and he couldn't even confess it. "We're doing everything we can, ma'am," Tsukachi had said gently. Toshinori had just stood there, a silent, coughing specter, the lie burning his throat worse than any reflux. His search had become an obsession. He couldn't use his all-might form. That would turn it into a media circus. So, as the frail Toshinori Yagi, he walked. He haunted the city's underbelly. He checked homeless shelters, back alley clinics, libraries, and internet cafes. He showed a worn, folded picture of a smiling, freckled boy to people who wouldn't give him the time of day. He was looking for a ghost. "You're killing yourself, Toshinori," Tsukachi said, stirring his coffee. They were in a small, quiet cafe, one of the few places the hero could relax without being recognized. The detective's face was etched with worry. "You're barely sleeping. You've lost more weight. Your time limit is down to less than 2 hours a day. You can't keep this up. I have to find him, Naomasa," Toshinori rasped, staring into his own untouched cup. "It's my fault he's gone. I took everything from him. I can't let it end like that. We've had no leads in months," Tsukachi said, his voice soft but firm. His quirk, human lie detector, was useless when the trail was this cold. "The working theory is that he's a runaway, living on the streets somewhere. But he's smart. He's staying off the grid, or someone found him," Toshinori whispered, the thought a cold dread that never left him. A quirkless, heartbroken boy alone in the city, he was prey. "We've found no evidence of that," Tsukachi reassured him, though his eyes betrayed his own doubts. "But listen, there's something else. Something strange. It might be nothing." Toshinori looked up, his hollow eyes latching onto the thread of hope. "What is it? For the past 6-7 months, we've been getting odd reports from the lower-income districts. Koto, Idagawa, the places heroes don't patrol as much. A sharp, localized drop in street-level crime, muggings, assaults, petty theft. That's good news, isn't it? It's the how that's strange," the detective continued, leaning forward. "We're finding the criminals. They're just left for us. In alleys tied to lampposts. They're not knocked out. They're conscious, and they're terrified. But also broken. Dislocated joints, shattered kneecaps, severed tendons. Always non-lethal, but brutally precise. It's not the work of a hero. It's too cruel. But it's not a villain either. Nothing is ever stolen, and no one is killed. They call him a ghost. Some of the low-level thugs have a name for him. Oni. The demon. Toshinori felt a chill that had nothing to do with his weakened state. A vigilante? A brutally efficient one, if so. No one's ever seen him clearly. Just a blur of motion. Some say he's unnaturally fast. But one witness, a drug dealer we picked up last week, he was babbling, said the Oni was just a kid. Green hair. The coffee cup trembled in Toshinori's hand. Green hair. No. It couldn't be. A quirkless boy? Doing that? It was impossible. But the desperation in his heart, the guilt that had been eating him alive, latched onto the connection. Where? Toshinori's voice was a ragged breath. Where was the last sighting? Sakachi sighed, knowing he couldn't stop him. An old, abandoned freight yard near the bay in Koto Ward. But Toshi, be careful. Whoever this is, they're dangerous. But Toshinori was already standing, his mind racing. It was a sliver of a chance, a madman's hope. But it was more than he'd had in 10 months. He had to know. He had to see. He had to atone. The freight yard was a graveyard of rusted metal and decaying concrete, silhouetted against a bruised, twilight sky. The air smelled of salt, rust, and neglect. Toshinori moved through the maze of derelict train cars, his breath misting in the cold air, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He found him on an overpass, overlooking the silent, dark waters of the bay. A lone figure, his back to Toshinori, staring out at the distant city lights. He was wearing simple, dark clothing, a black hoodie, black cargo pants, and worn, dark green sneakers that looked vaguely familiar. Even from a distance, Toshinori could see the change. The boy's posture was no longer the apologetic slump of a shy teenager. It was perfectly still, balanced, radiating an aura of coiled, dangerous potential. Toshinori's breath caught in his throat. It was him. He was taller, leaner, but it was him. Midoriya Shonen? The voice came out as a broken rasp. The figure on the overpass didn't startle. He simply turned his head slowly, his movements economical and deliberate. And Toshinori's fragile hope shattered. The face that looked back at him was Izuku Midoriya's, but it was as if he were looking at a stranger. The round, soft cheeks were gone, replaced by sharp angles. A thin, pale scar cut a line across his left cheekbone. But it was the eyes that stopped Toshinori's heart. The bright, emerald-green pools of hero worship were gone. In their place were chips of ice, cold, analytical, and utterly devoid of emotion. They looked at him not as a boy looking at his idol, but as a predator assessing an unknown creature that had wandered into its territory. All might, Izuku said. His voice was different, too. Deeper, quieter, and stripped of all inflection. It was the voice of someone who had not engaged in casual conversation for a very long time. Toshinori stumbled forward, a wave of relief and horror washing over him. My boy, you're alive. I've been looking for you everywhere. Your mother, I am aware. Izuku cut him off, his tone flat. He turned his body fully to face him, and for the first time, Toshinori saw the hard, lean muscle on his frame, the way he stood with a perfect center of balance. This was not a runaway victim. This was a survivor. A fighter. Her emotional distress was a calculated, acceptable consequence. Toshinori stopped, stunned. Acceptable consequence? Midoriya Shonen, what are you talking about? What's happened to you? Izuku's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile, but it held no warmth. It was a clinical, condescending expression. Evolution. You told me to be realistic. I have. This isn't realistic, this is. Toshinori gestured vaguely at him, at the scars, the cold eyes. This is dark. I heard rumors. A vigilante they call Oni. Crippling criminals. Is that you? Vigilante is an inaccurate term, Izuku stated, his eyes narrowing slightly as he analyzed Toshinori's skeletal form. It implies working outside a law one still respects. I operate on a different principle. The current system of heroism is a flawed, inefficient model based on public relations and reactionary tactics. I am providing a more effective solution. Toshinori felt like he had been punched. The boy was talking like a sociology textbook written by a psychopath. The earnest, stammering fanboy was well and truly gone, replaced by this cold, calculating creature. A solution? He choked out. My boy, that is not a solution. Justice without compassion is just brutality. A hero has to inspire hope, not fear. To save people with a smile. A smile, Izuku repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. A smile didn't stop you from crushing a child's dream on a rooftop. A smile didn't save Kaken from the sludge villain. Your punch did. Your brand, your symbol of peace, is a lie. A comforting, marketable lie for a society that can't handle the truth. The truth is that hope doesn't stop a man with a knife in a dark alley. Fear does. The guilt was a physical weight now, crushing Toshinori's chest, making it hard to breathe. I was wrong, he pleaded, taking another step forward, his hand outstretched. What I said to you, it was the mistake of a tired, bitter man. I was wrong. You can be a hero. You have the spirit. I saw it that day. You ran in when no one else would. That's what matters. That was the action of a suicidal, emotional child. Izuku countered, his voice like ice. It was tactically unsound and achieved nothing. I have since purged myself of such reckless impulses. Toshinori's hand fell to his side. He was failing. He was losing him all over again. He looked at this hardened, scarred boy, this ghost of the child he had broken, and a desperate, insane idea began to form in his mind. There was only one thing he had left to offer, one last, desperate gamble to pull this boy back from the brink, to give him the power to be the hero he was always meant to be, the right way. I didn't just come here to apologize, Toshinori said, his voice dropping, filled with a new, desperate gravity. I came to make you an offer. I told you my secret that day. About my wound. About my power. Izuku's eyes narrowed, his head tilting in a flicker of genuine curiosity. One for all, yes, Toshinori breathed. It is a sacred torch, passed from one generation to the next. A crystallization of power, stockpiled to fight evil. And it is a power that can be given to another. He looked Izuku straight in the eye, his own gaze burning with a fanatic plea. I have been searching for a worthy successor. Someone with a true hero's spirit. I thought I had lost that. But you're here. You still have that fire in you. I know you do, buried under all this coldness. Let me help you. Let me guide you. He took a deep breath, his next words the most important he would ever speak. Midoriya Izuku. I want to offer you my power. I want you to inherit one for all. He expected something. Tears. Shock. A joyous, disbelieving cry. The catharsis of a dream, once shattered, being miraculously restored. He was offering this boy the world, the very thing he had once craved more than life itself. He got nothing. Izuku's face remained a blank, unreadable mask. His eyes didn't widen. His jaw didn't drop. Instead, his gaze became distant, unfocused, as if he were running a complex calculation in his head. The silence stretched, thick and unnerving, broken only by the distant lapping of water and the wind whistling through the rusted steel. Toshinori's hope began to wither. Finally Izuku spoke, his voice quiet and analytical. A transferable, power stockpiling quirk. Passed through 8 previous users. Its potential grows exponentially with each transfer. Superhuman strength, speed, agility. The ultimate physical enhancement. He paused, his cold eyes focusing on Toshinori again. It is a tool of immense, unparalleled utility. Toshinori stared, his blood running cold. A tool. He had just offered this boy the legacy of heroes, the literal symbol of peace, and he had assessed it like a piece of military hardware. So, you accept? Toshinori asked, his voice barely a whisper. Izuku gave a single, curt nod. A quirk is a tool. My current methods are effective, but limited by the frailties of a baseline human body. This tool will significantly increase my operational efficiency. It will allow me to neutralize a greater number of threats in a shorter time frame. The logical course of action is to acquire it. There was no joy. No gratitude. It was a transaction. A hostile takeover. Toshinori felt a profound, soul-deep horror. He had come here to save a boy from the darkness, and he was about to hand that darkness the most powerful weapon on the planet. But what choice did he have? To refuse now would be to abandon him completely. This was his only chance, however slim, to remain in the boy's life, to guide him, to try and steer him back toward the light. With a trembling hand, Toshinori plucked a single strand of his blonde hair. He held it out. It felt less like a sacred inheritance, and more like he was handing a loaded gun to a killer. "Eat this," he said, his voice hollow. Izuku took the hair without hesitation. He looked at it for a moment, a flicker of something, not reverence, but cold assessment, in his eyes. Then he placed it on his tongue and swallowed, his expression unchanging. For a moment, nothing happened. Toshinori watched, his heart pounding a funeral drum. Izuku stood perfectly still, his eyes closed. "I can feel it," Izuku said, his voice a low murmur. "It's a reservoir. A sea of energy. The vestiges of the others are present." He opened his eyes, and for a split second, they seemed to glow with a faint inner light. "They are data points. Echoes of past applications." He held up his right hand, staring at it intently. "The previous vessel, yourself, could not handle it at 100% without breaking your body until much later in your development. My body has been conditioned for extreme physical stress, but the backlash is still a primary concern." Slowly, deliberately he focused. Toshinori watched in horror and amazement as faint, red lines of energy began to crackle across Izuku's skin, not exploding outwards, but crawling, contained, like veins of crimson lightning under glass. The power wasn't rampaging. He was guiding it. "Control," Izuku whispered to himself. "Not a floodgate. An irrigation channel. Direct the flow only where it's needed. Minimal output for maximal effect." The red lines converged on his fist, which began to glow with a soft, green-white light. A low hum filled the air, the sound of immense, controlled power. He wasn't breaking. He was adapting to it in seconds, with a level of control Toshinori himself hadn't achieved for years. This was the result of Stain's brutal training, an unbreakable mind, an iron will, and a profound understanding of the human body, now applied to a godlike power. Izuku flexed his glowing fingers, his expression one of intense, predatory focus. He wasn't looking at it with the wonder of a boy who had just been given a miracle. He was looking at it with the satisfaction of a master craftsman who had just acquired the perfect, most devastatingly precise tool for his work. A small, cold smile finally touched his lips. It was not a smile of joy. It was a smile of grim satisfaction. A predator baring its teeth. He looked up from his hand, his glowing eyes meeting Toshinori's horrified ones across the desolate freight yard. "The equation has changed," Izuku stated, his voice quiet, yet carrying the weight of an earthquake. "My work can begin in earnest now." Toshinori Yagi, the symbol of peace, stood shivering in the cold, realizing with sickening certainty that he had not saved Izuku Midoriya. He had just armed him. He had given the Oni the power of a god. The unwanted gift had been accepted, and the world would soon pay the price for his mistake. The grand archway of Yue High School was an architectural marvel, a gleaming symbol of hope and heroism that soared into the morning sky. For years, it had been the object of Izuku Midoriya's most fervent dreams, a hallowed gateway to a world he had worshipped from afar. To pass through it was to take the first step toward becoming a legend, toward joining the pantheon of gods presided over by All Might. Today, as he walked beneath it, Izuku felt nothing of that boyish reverence. He saw the archway not as a symbol, but as a structure, reinforced plasteel, high-tensile carbon composites, an estimated 500 cubic meters of concrete in its foundation, a formidable defensive position in a potential siege scenario. The 10 months since he had accepted one for all had been a period of brutal, relentless integration. His training with Stain had not ceased, it had intensified. The warehouse became a laboratory where the raw, untamed power of the quirk was dissected, analyzed, and ruthlessly subjugated. The first few weeks had been agonizing. The power was a roaring inferno, and his body was a flimsy container. The first time he tried to channel it into a kick, he nearly torn his own leg off at the hip. The backlash was catastrophic. But where the old Izuku would have seen failure, the new Izuku saw only data. Backlash is a symptom of inefficient energy transfer. He had written in his new black notebook, his hand shaking from the lingering pain. The power seeks the path of least resistance. The body is not a single unit, but a system of levers and fulcrums. To channel 100% into a single point, a fist, a foot, is to create a catastrophic pressure failure. The vessel ruptures. Stain, ever the pragmatist, had been unimpressed by the raw power. A cannon that shatters after one shot is useless, he had rasped, watching Izuku nurse a limb that was a tapestry of purple and black bruises. Your mind is your primary weapon. The quirk is secondary. Subdue it. Tame it. Or it will destroy you. So Izuku had approached it not as a hero learning an ultimate move, but as an engineer building a new kind of engine. He meditated for hours, focusing on the sea of energy within him, not trying to command it, but to understand its currents. He learned to draw just a sliver of its power, a mere fraction of a %, and spread it across his entire body like a thin film. He called it full cowl. It wasn't a sudden explosion of power. It was a low, constant hum, a state of heightened readiness. With it active, his senses sharpened. He could see the dust motes dancing in the warehouse air. He could hear the scuttling of a rat 50 yards away. His body became a perfectly tuned instrument. At 1%, he could outrun a professional sprinter. At 3%, he could leap onto the roof of the warehouse from a standstill. At 5%, a flick of his finger could shatter a concrete block. Stain had adapted their training. It was no longer about a quirkless boy surviving. It was about a superpowered weapon honing its edge. He would attack with lethal speed, and Izuku, with full cowl active, had to parry, dodge, and counter with surgical precision. Don't use it as a hammer! Stain would snarl, parrying a superpowered but clumsy strike. Use it to enhance your technique. Your speed is now a tool for positioning. Your strength is a tool for disabling. Use it to be in the right place at the right time to apply the minimum force necessary for maximum effect. A broken arm is a broken arm, whether you use 5% or 50%. The extra energy is wasted. Waste is failure. This was the mindset Izuku brought to UA. He was not here to make friends. He was not here to prove himself. He was here to acquire a license. A hero license was the ultimate tool, a legal key that would allow him to operate openly, to bring his brand of brutal, efficient order to the world without the legal hindrances of vigilantism. UA was not the dream, it was a means to an end. He found his assigned seat in the massive orientation auditorium. The air was buzzing with the nervous energy of thousands of hopeful teenagers. There were a cacophony of excited chatter, boastful proclamations, and anxious whispers. Izuku registered it all as background noise, his attention focused inward, maintaining a low-level full cowl at 0.5%, a barely perceptible thrum that kept his senses on a razor's edge. Present Mick's booming voice filled the hall, but Izuku tuned out the theatrics, focusing only on the core data. A practical exam. 3 types of robots, assigned point values based on difficulty, 1, 2, and 3 points. A 10-minute time limit. Multiple urban mock-up arenas. His eyes scanned the printout of the arena map. Grid-like streets, a mixture of high-rises and smaller buildings. Multiple choke points. Open plazas. Ideal for ambush tactics and controlling lines of sight. He was already formulating a strategy. Then, a boy with glasses and dark blue hair stood up, ramrod straight. Tenya Ida? From the famous Ida hero family. Izuku had already compiled a preliminary file on him. Quirk engine. High-speed mobility, likely limited turning radius. Personality, formal, rigid, obsessed with rules and procedure. A potential asset in a structured team, a liability in chaotic situations. Ida was chastising Present Mike for a misprint on the handout, the existence of a fourth, unmentioned robot type, and then he turned his rigid posture and accusatory finger on Izuku. And you, with the curly green hair! You have been muttering this entire time! It is distracting and unbecoming of a potential UE student! If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave. The spotlight hit Izuku. Hundreds of eyes turned to him. The old Izuku would have combusted on the spot, stammering apologies, turning 50 shades of red. This Izuku simply lifted his head slowly. His cold, analytical eyes met Ida's. He didn't feel embarrassment or anger. He felt nothing. He had been performing threat assessments on the examinees around him, murmuring his observations under his breath. It was a habit Stain had drilled into him, always be analyzing. He offered no defense. No apology. He simply held Ida's gaze for a 3-second count, his expression utterly blank. The silence was more unnerving than any retort. Ida faltered, his righteous indignation wilting under the unnerving stillness of that stare. He stammered something about focus and sat down, flustered and confused. A few rows ahead, Katsuki Bakugo felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had seen Deku. No, he couldn't call him that anymore, it didn't fit, at the school gates. He had tried to confront him, to yell, to provoke, to get some kind of reaction that made sense. He'd gotten nothing but a dead-eyed stare and a dismissive glance that made him feel like an insect. For 10 months, the worthless, quirkless Deku he had known his whole life had been gone, and this thing had shown up for the exam. He was taller, harder, and moved with a quiet confidence that was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Bakugo had spent his life looking down on him, and now, for the first time, he felt like he was the one being looked down upon. It was terrifying. The massive gates of Battle Center B slid open with a groaning roar. The assembled students tensed, 100 different quirks simmering, ready to be unleashed. Izuku stood at the back of the pack, his body relaxed, his eyes half-lidded. He could hear the frantic heartbeats of the others, the sharp intakes of breath. He was an island of calm in a sea of anxiety. President Mick's voice screamed from the watchtower. Gah! The crowd was silent for a beat, confused. What's the matter? The test has started. That's how real life works, kids. There's no countdown for a villain attack. Run! 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 The dam broke. The students surged forward, a chaotic stampede of quirks and ambition. Aoyama fired his naval laser. Ida's engines roared to life. Bakugo launched himself into the air with a series of explosions. Izuku did not run with them. He waited. He watched the initial surge, the mad dash for the easy, one-point robots near the entrance. It was inefficient. A waste of energy for low returns. He let them go. Then he moved. He pushed off, channeling a controlled 5% of one for all into his legs. The world didn't blur, it sharpened. To the other students, he was a flicker of green lightning, a ghost that passed them in the blink of an eye. To him, they were statues. He weaved through the chaotic fray, the explosions and laser beams painting the air in slow motion. He ignored the one-pointers. He ignored the two-pointers. His target was the heart of the city, where the three-pointers would be more densely packed, and where the other students would not yet have reached. It was a simple calculation of risk versus reward. He arrived in the central plaza in under 10 seconds. It was a ghost town. And then, the ground began to tremble. From the side streets, three-pointers emerged, hulking bipedal machines with thick armor plating and multiple weapon systems. One of them swiveled its turret, its optical sensor glowing red as it locked onto him. A volley of rubber bullets erupted from its arm-mounted cannon. Izuku didn't just dodge. He moved with the bullets, flowing between them like water. He was using Stain's teachings. See the trajectory, understand the firing pattern, place yourself where the attack is not. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, his movements silent and fluid. He didn't wind up for a massive, city block leveling punch. All Might would have done that. It was showy, powerful, and utterly wasteful. Instead, Izuku leaped. He used the robot's own body as a launch pad, his feet finding purchase on its shoulder. As he flew over its head, he drew a single, reinforced combat knife from a sheath on his thigh. It was a simple, non-regulated piece of equipment he was allowed to bring. He channeled a mere 3% of one for all into his arm, just enough to give it an impossible sharpness and force. He didn't stab the head. He drove the knife into the articulated joint of the robot's neck, severing the thick bundle of power conduits and hydraulic lines within. The blade cut through the reinforced casing like it was butter. Schlick. The sound was quiet, clinical. The robot's red eye flickered and died. It froze for a second before collapsing forward, its limbs locking up. It was inert. Neutralized. Not smashed, not obliterated. Disabled. No broken bones. No emotional outcry. Just the job done. He landed silently on the pavement as the metal giant crashed to the ground behind him. 2 more 3-pointers were lumbering towards him. He repeated the process, a whirlwind of terrifying efficiency. He flowed around a sweeping laser beam, scaled the robot's leg, and drove his foot, empowered by 5%, into the back of its knee joint. The joint shattered with a sickening crunch of metal. The robot crumpled. For the third, he used a simple, OF8-powered jab to its central processing unit, located in the chest after he'd analyzed the first one's schematics. The blow was no bigger than a normal punch, but it cracked the chassis and destroyed the delicate electronics within. In the UA observation room, the mood had shifted from excitement to stunned silence. "Who is that kid?" A hero with a cement block head, Cementos, murmured. "Izuku Midoriya." Power Loader grunted, zooming in on a monitor. "Quirk is listed as superpower. Vague. Looks like a standard enhancement type, but look at how he moves." Aizawa's eyes were narrowed behind his yellow goggles, his usual bored expression replaced with one of intense, concerned scrutiny. "He's not fighting them. He's dismantling them. He's identifying structural weaknesses and applying precise force. He's treating them like an engineering problem, not a battle." Mizu, the principal, sat in his chair, his beady black eyes gleaming with an unnerving intelligence. He took a sip of his tea. "He's accrued 45 points in less than 2 minutes. All from 3-pointers. His efficiency rating is unprecedented." All Might, in his skeletal form, stood at the back of the room, hidden in the shadows. He felt a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He had hoped, he had prayed that UA's bright, hopeful atmosphere would be a balm to Izuku's darkened soul. He had hoped that being surrounded by other aspiring heroes would reignite the spark he had so foolishly extinguished. But watching this was not a hero in training. This was a soldier on a mission. The way he moved, the cold precision, the complete lack of wasted energy or emotion, it was Stain's ideology, amplified by the power of One for All. It was his worst nightmare, made manifest. He had given a demon the wings of an angel. Back in the arena, Izuku was a phantom. He moved through the city, and the robots fell. He didn't shout. He didn't celebrate. Each takedown was silent, swift, and brutal. He used OFA-powered strikes to shatter joints, to rip out wiring, to crush CPUs. He became a one-man insurgency, turning the city into a scrap heap. Other students began to encounter him. A girl with pink skin and horns, Mina Ishido, was struggling with a 2-pointer, her acid not melting the armor fast enough. Before the robot could strike her, a green blur shot past. There was a sharp crack, and the robot's leg buckled, sending it crashing to the ground. When Mina looked up, Izuku was already gone, disappearing down an alley. She hadn't seen him as a savior, she'd seen him as a predator taking down his prey, and she just happened to be in the way. It was terrifying. The other examinees started to avoid the areas where the robots were falling silent. A rumor began to pass between them, a panicked whisper about a green demon, who was annihilating everything in his path. They were fighting for points. He was conducting an extermination. With 2 minutes left on the clock, Izuku had amassed 78 villain points. He was perched on a rooftop, his senses extended, listening to the sounds of the battleground. He had fulfilled his primary objective, to score high enough to guarantee entry. Continued action was an unnecessary expenditure of energy. He decided to enter a passive observation phase, and then, the ground began to shake, a deep, groaning tremor that vibrated up through the soles of his shoes. The students below screamed. Buildings began to crumble. From behind a skyscraper, an object of impossible scale began to rise. The 0-pointer. It was colossal, a 10-story behemoth of steel and hydraulics that dwarfed the surrounding buildings. Its massive head swiveled, its single, vast optical sensor glowing with malevolent red light. It was less a robot and more a walking natural disaster. President Mick's voice crackled over the speakers. That's the 0-pointer, kids! The big obstacle! Worth 0 points! My advice? Run away! And they did. The remaining students, who had been bravely fighting for their future moments before, broke into a panicked, screaming retreat. It was the only logical response. The 0-pointer was not an opponent, it was an event to be survived. Izuku watched the chaos from his perch, his expression unchanged. He analyzed the robot. Massive energy signature, likely nuclear. Armor plating is too thick for conventional attacks. Exposed hydraulics at the major joints, hips, knees, neck. Primary function, an impassable obstacle designed to test risk assessment and panic response in applicants. The logical course of action was to retreat. It was worth 0 points. Engaging it was a tactical failure. He was about to turn and leave when a small, choked cry reached his ears. His eyes snapped down to the base of the colossal robot. A girl with a brown bob haircut and rosy cheeks was trapped, her leg pinned beneath a large slab of fallen concrete. It was the same girl who had stopped him from tripping at the entrance, the one with the gravity quirk. Ochako Uraraka. The 0-pointer's massive foot lifted, casting a shadow that blotted out the sun. It was preparing to take a step, directly where she lay trapped. The other students were running. The pro-heroes overseeing the exam were preparing to intervene, but they wouldn't be fast enough. Something stirred in Izuku. A flicker of an old, buried instinct. A ghost in the machine. Objective, save the civilian. But his new mind, the cold, logical mind forged by Stain, immediately countered. Primary objective, pass the exam. Secondary objective, preserve energy. The girl is an unknown variable. Her rescue provides 0 points and incurs significant risk. For a split second, two ideologies warred within him. The boy who ran into danger without a thought versus the weapon that calculated every outcome. Her death serves no strategic purpose, the cold voice of logic concluded. Her survival, however, demonstrates superior capability under pressure to the observers. The proctor intervention is too slow. Action is required. Calculate optimal solution. The war was over in an instant. Emotion hadn't won. Logic had simply found a new, more efficient path. Izuku pushed off the rooftop. He didn't scream a challenge. He didn't announce his presence. He was a silent, green missile. He activated full cal, pushing it to 8%, the highest he could safely maintain for a short burst of acrobatic movement. He didn't run towards the robot. He ran up the side of a half-crumbled building, using the wall as his personal ramp. He launched himself into the air, a breathtaking arc that carried him towards the 0-pointer's upper torso. The wind screamed past his ears. He saw All Might's path, a single, 100% bone-shattering punch. Raw. Inelegant. A last resort? Stain's path would be to cripple it, to make it suffer. His own path would be different. It would be an execution. As he flew through the air, his mind was a supercomputer. He saw the thick armor plating on the face and chest. Brute force was inefficient. But the neck was a complex array of articulated plates, pistons, and thick bundles of cabling connecting the head, the command center, to the torso, the power source. It was a structural weakness. He landed on the robot's shoulder, his OFA-enhanced grip keeping him anchored as the machine shuddered. He scrambled towards the neck, his movements precise and certain. He found the spot he'd identified from the air, a junction box where the primary power conduits fed into the head. The casing was thick, but not as thick as the main armor. He took a low stance, bracing himself. He focused all of one for all, not 8%, not 20%. He drew upon the roaring sea within him, pulling up a tidal wave of power. For a single, terrifying instant, he channeled a full 100% into his right arm. Red lightning, thick as ropes, exploded around him. The power was immense, an agony and an ecstasy. His bones screamed in protest. But he didn't throw a punch. A punch was a blunt instrument. He formed his hand into a knife edge. A Shudo strike. All of that cosmic power, focused into a single, razor-thin line of impact. He drove his hand forward. Sever. He thought, the single, clinical command cutting through the storm of power. The impact was not a deafening boom. It was a sharp, high-pitched crack followed by the sound of 1,000 capacitors shorting out at once. His hand sheared through the armored casing and deep into the robot's neck, severing the power conduits with the finality of a guillotine. There was no explosion. Just a wave of intense electromagnetic feedback and a cascade of sparks. The zero-pointer's colossal red eye, which had been locking onto the running students, flickered. It went dim, the immense limbs froze in mid-stride. The low hum of its nuclear core died with a pathetic whine. For a moment, the giant stood there, a silent monument. Then, with a deep, groaning protest of tortured metal, it began to collapse, falling backward, away from Uraraka. It crashed into the buildings behind it, sending up a colossal cloud of dust and debris. Izuku stood on the robot's shoulder, his arm buried to the elbow in its neck. He pulled it free. There was no break. His bones had held. The conditioning, the control, the precision of the strike, it had all worked. No wasted energy. No self-destructive backlash. Just a job done. He leaped from the falling giant, landing silently on the ground a safe distance away. The dust cloud washed over the area. When it cleared, the other students and the observing pros saw an unbelievable sight. The unstoppable zero-pointer, dead, its head hanging limp from a surgically damaged neck. And standing before it, a lone, silent figure. The buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku didn't look at the girl he had saved. He didn't look at the stunned faces of his fellow examinees. He simply turned and walked calmly toward the exit, his face an emotionless mask. In the observation room, the silence was absolute. The assembled pro-heroes stared at the monitor, their mouths agape. Power Loader was gripping the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. Cementos looked pale. Aizawa slowly pushed his goggles up onto his forehead, his dark eyes wide with a mixture of awe and profound fear. He didn't accrue a single rescue point, he whispered, his voice hoarse. The system isn't programmed to award points for saving someone from the obstacle. He just neutralized the threat. The threat to himself, and incidentally to the girl. All Might was clutching his chest, a ragged cough escaping his lips. He saw it now. The boy hadn't rushed in out of heroism. It had been a calculation. A demonstration. A tactical problem solved with overwhelming, terrifying force. Nisa finally broke the silence. The small, mammalian principal set his teacup down with a quiet click. A slow, deeply unsettling smile spread across his furry face. Well, he chirped, his voice filled with a chilling glee. That was certainly something. It seems this year, we've found something truly special. But as Aizawa looked at the principal's excited grin and then back at the cold, departing figure of Izuku Midoriya on the screen, he couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't found a hero. They had just welcomed a monster through their gates. The letter from Yui arrived in a plain, unassuming envelope. There was no fanfare. Izuku had intercepted it before Inko Midoriya could see it, a simple matter of tracking the postal worker's route, and timing his trip to the convenience store accordingly. He had been living at home for the week leading up to the exam results, a strategic decision to allay any further suspicion from his distraught mother. He had told her he'd been staying with a friend, a lie that was as hollow as the look in her eyes. She was so desperate to have him back, she didn't question the absurdity of his 10-month absence. He opened the letter in the sterile privacy of a public library bathroom. There was no all-might projection, no booming congratulations, just a simple, formal letter of acceptance, and a breakdown of his exam score. Examinee, Midoriya Izuku. Villain points, 78. Rescue points 0. Total score, 78. Rank first. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. The rank was irrelevant. The score was a means to an end. All that mattered was the single line at the bottom, assigned to Class 1A. Objective achieved. He felt no pride, no joy. Only the quiet satisfaction of a plan successfully executed. On the first day of school, he dressed in the crisp Yui uniform. It felt foreign, a costume for a role he was about to play. The red tie was a slash of color against the drab gray, and he knotted it with practiced, mechanical efficiency. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. The face that stared back was his, but it felt like looking at a stranger. The freckles were still there, a faint constellation across his cheeks, but they were a relic of a boy who no longer existed. His eyes, cold and still, dominated his face. They were the eyes of a soldier, not a student. Izuku? Are you ready? His mother's voice, fragile and hopeful, came from outside his bedroom door. Yes, he replied, his voice even. He opened the door. Inko's face was a mixture of teary pride and lingering anxiety. She fussed with his collar, her hands trembling slightly. Oh, Izuku. I'm so proud of you. Yue-hai, it's what you've always wanted. What I wanted is dead, he thought, but he remained silent, his expression a carefully constructed neutral mask. He allowed her the brief contact, registering her touch as a data point, trembling hands, elevated heart rate, scent of saline from recent crying. Maternal affection. A variable he would have to manage. I have to go, or I'll be late, he said, gently disengaging. He walked out of the apartment without a backward glance, leaving his mother standing in the doorway, her proud smile faltering as she looked at the rigid, unfamiliar back of her only son. The classroom of 1A was a hive of nervous energy. He recognized most of them from the exam. Tenya Ida was already seated, his posture impossibly rigid. Katsuki Bakugo was at his desk, feet up, scowling at the world as if it personally offended him by existing. The gravity girl, Ochako Uraraka, was talking animatedly with a girl with pink hair. Izuku's entrance cast a subtle chill over the room. He didn't greet anyone. He didn't search for a friendly face. His eyes swept across the classroom, a silent, comprehensive scan. He wasn't looking at classmates. He was looking at potential assets, liabilities and threats. Ida Tenya. Quirk engine. Predictable. Obsessed with rules. Can be manipulated by appealing to procedure. Uraraka, Ochako. Quirk, zero gravity. Touch activated. Effective for support and environmental control. Naive, emotionally driven. A potential liability in a high-stress scenario. Bakugo, Katsuki. Quirk, explosion. High-yield offensive power. Volatile, arrogant, emotionally unstable. His ego is his greatest weakness and can be easily exploited to force tactical errors. A liability to any team he's on. His gaze lingered on Bakugo for a fraction of a second longer. The blond boy met his eyes, a snarl already forming on his lips. Izuku's expression didn't change. He simply held the stare, his gaze flat and empty, before dismissing him completely and continuing his scan. Bakugo's snarl faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion and something that looked unnervingly like fear. The dynamic between them had been fundamentally broken, and Bakugo didn't have the emotional vocabulary to understand it. Izuku chose a desk in the back corner, the optimal position for observation. It gave him a clear line of sight to the door and the majority of the room. He sat down, placed his bag beside him, and folded his hands on the desk. He became perfectly still, a statue carved from silence, his presence a void in the classroom's boisterous atmosphere. The other students noticed. They would glance his way, their conversations faltering for a moment. He was the one who had taken down the zero-pointer. The rumors about him were wild and varied. Some said he had a monstrous strength quirk, that he'd shattered the robot with a single punch. Others whispered that he had some kind of disintegration ability. But no one had seen it clearly. He was an enigma, and his unnerving stillness only deepened the mystery. Uraraka, buoyed by a sense of gratitude, decided to approach him. Hi! I'm Uraraka Ochako. We met at the entrance, just before the exam. Well, we didn't meet, but you caught me when I tripped, and then you saved me from that giant robot. That was amazing! I tried to talk to the judges about giving you some of my points, but they said. Izuku turned his head to face her. His eyes were not unkind, but they were utterly devoid of warmth. They were like a doctor's, examining a specimen. Your gratitude is noted, he said, his voice quiet and even, cutting her off mid-sentence. It is, however, unnecessary. Your predicament was a tactical problem. I solved it. There is no debt. Uraraka's cheerful smile froze on her face. She stared at him, bewildered. That wasn't how people talked. That wasn't how a hero, or an aspiring one, was supposed to act. There was no camaraderie, no shared relief. It was like talking to a machine. Oh. Right. Well, I'm Midori Izuku, she stammered, trying to recover. I know, he replied, and then he turned his head back to the front of the classroom. The conversation terminated. Uraraka was left standing there, feeling a profound and unsettling chill. The boy who had saved her life was a complete and utter stranger, and a deeply frightening one at that. She retreated to her desk, the friendly chatter with her new friends now seeming hollow. The arrival of Shota Aizawa, emerging from a yellow sleeping bag like a disgruntled moth, finally silenced the class. His tired, bloodshot eyes swept over them, lingering for a full 3 seconds on Izuku in the back corner. Aizawa had watched the exam footage dozens of times. He had seen the cold, brutal efficiency, the soulless precision. This was not a hopeful teenager. This was something else. And he was now Aizawa's responsibility. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down, Aizawa grumbled, his voice a monotone drone. Life is not that patient. We're not wasting time on pleasantries or orientation. Put these on and meet me on the field. He held up a UA gym uniform. The sun beat down on the training field. The other students were grumbling, confused by the sudden quirk assessment test. It was unorthodox. It was unfair. Izuku stood among them, silent and observant. He understood immediately. Aizawa was a pragmatist. He was establishing a baseline, assessing their raw capabilities without the structure of a formal exam. He was gathering data. Izuku approved. It was efficient. Aizawa's gaze landed on him again, then shifted to Bakugo. Bakugo. You placed second in the exam. What was your best softball throw in junior high? 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk. Bakugo grinned, a feral, confident expression. He wound up, his hand crackling with explosions. Die! He screamed, launching the ball with a massive blast. The ball soared into the sky, a tiny speck against the blue. Aizawa held up the device. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in cheers and exclamations of awesome. And that looks so fun! Izuku watched, his expression unchanging. Inefficient. The explosive force is omnidirectional. A significant percentage of the energy is wasted on light, sound, and concussive force not directed at the projectile. A shaped charge would be more effective. Fun? Aizawa's voice cut through the excitement like a knife. His lips pulled back into a grim, unnerving smile. You think this is fun? You have 3 years to become heroes. You think it's all going to be games and super moves? Fine. New rule. The student who ranks last in total points will be judged as having no potential and will be expelled immediately. Panic ripped through the class. Uraraka gasped. Ida looked scandalized. Aizawa's threat was a bucket of ice water, shocking them into the grim reality of their situation. This wasn't a game. Izuku felt nothing. Expulsion was a failed outcome, to be avoided. The test was simply a series of parameters to be met and exceeded. He began running silent calculations. 8 tests. My performance must be optimized across all of them. Identify my weakest event and overperform in my strongest to compensate. The first test, 50-meter dash. He was paired with Ida. The engine-legged boy got into a sprinter's stance, his leg vents humming. Izuku simply stood at the line, relaxed. The starting pistol fired. Ida shot off like a bullet. But he wasn't the only one. Izuku activated full call at 7%. He didn't run. He moved. He took 3 impossibly long, silent strides, his form a blur of green-tinged motion. He crossed the finish line a full half-second before Ida, coming to a perfect, silent stop. The timer flashed. 3.04 seconds. Ida stared, his jaw slack. He had gone all out, and this strange, silent boy had beaten him without even looking like he was trying. The rest of the class was silent, their eyes wide. The grip strength test. The machine was designed to measure the physical strength of students with enhancement quirks, calibrated to withstand several hundred kilograms of force. Izuku wrapped his hand around the grip. He didn't grimace or strain. He simply channeled a controlled 10% into his hand and squeezed. There was a sickening crunch of protesting metal and plastic. The digital display flashed an impossible string of numbers before flickering and dying with a puff of smoke. Error. He had broken it. Power loader would have a fit. The students around him took an involuntary step back. Standing long jump. He cleared the entire sandpit. Sideways shuffling. He was a lateral blur. On every test, the result was the same: silent, overwhelming, and terrifyingly efficient performance. There was no joy, no triumphant shout, no sign of exertion. He was like a machine executing a program, and his program was perfection. Finally, it was his turn for the ball throw. He stepped into the circle, the small, hard ball feeling feather-light in his hand. The class watched in hushed anticipation. This was the test where Bakugo had shown. This was the test that best represented raw power. What would the monster who broke the grip machine do? He took a deep breath, and for the first time, Aizawa saw him preparing to use a significant amount of power. The air around him began to hum. Green lightning, more intense than it had been for the dash, began to crackle around his arm. Channeled the energy. Not just from the arm. From the ground up. Legs, core, back, shoulder. A kinetic chain. The arm is just the final delivery system. Focus it all into a single point. The fingertip. He remembered All Might's throw during his own early training, a pressure wave that had ripped up the ground. Inefficient. All that power, and most of it was wasted on collateral damage. He was about to throw when Aizawa's capture weapon shot out, wrapping around him. The green energy died instantly. I erased your quirk, Aizawa said, his own eyes glowing a menacing red, his hair floating. A student like you, who can't control his power, is a liability. You destroy your own body and become a burden to whoever has to save you. Izuku slowly turned his head. He looked at Aizawa, then at the capture weapon, then back at Aizawa. There was no fear in his eyes. Only analysis. You are mistaken, Izuku said, his voice a low, even tone. My quirk is under my complete control. Aizawa's eyes widened slightly. The boy hadn't flinched. He wasn't scared. He was correcting him. This is one for all, Izuku continued, his voice dropping so only Aizawa could hear. Its output is scalable. The previous demonstration you are likely thinking of involved a 100% focus smash, resulting in catastrophic biofeedback. My application is different. I am using a full-body reinforcement at a low percentage, with a focused, high-yield burst at the point of release. There will be no backlash. Aizawa was frozen. The boy knew his quirk's name. He knew Aizawa had seen All Might's file on him. And he was discussing its mechanics with the cold detachment of a physicist describing a particle accelerator. This wasn't a student. This was something else entirely. Aizawa let his hair fall, deactivating his quirk. The capture weapon slithered back. Fine, he grumbled, his mind reeling. Prove it. The green lightning returned, coiling around Izuku's arm. He wound up, his motion a perfect, fluid spiral. As he threw, he focused the power not into the palm, but into the tip of his index finger, releasing it at the last possible moment. The ball shot forward. It didn't just fly. It broke the sound barrier with a sharp crack that made everyone flinch. But there was no massive explosion, no destructive pressure wave, just a single, focused application of impossible force. The ball vanished into the sky, a tiny projectile propelled by a god's flick. Aizawa held up the device. After a long moment, it beeped. He turned it around for the class to see. Infinity. The infinity symbol glowed on the screen. The field was dead silent. Aizawa stared at the device, then at Izuku, who was calmly walking out of the circle, his arm completely unharmed. There was no smoke, no broken bones. Just a quiet display of absolute, terrifying control. This changed everything. This wasn't a reckless kid with a new quirk. This was a prodigy of terrifying proportions. The final results were posted. Izuku was first. No one was surprised. Mineta, the small, purple-haired boy, was last. He started to cry, wailing about his unfair life. By the way, Aizawa said, his voice flat. The expulsion thing was a lie. The class erupted in relieved sighs, except for a girl with a black ponytail, Momo Yayorozu. Of course it was a lie, she said, though she looked shaken. It was just a logical deception to make us perform at our best. Izuku had known it was a lie from the start. Aizawa was a pragmatist. Expelling a student on the first day based on a non-standardized test without observing their growth potential was inefficient. The threat was simply a motivational tool. As the class was dismissed, Bakugo cornered him, slamming a hand against the wall to block his path. His face was a mask of rage, confusion, and a deep, gnawing fear. DKU. He finally snarled, the old name feeling wrong on his tongue. What the hell was that? You were quirkless. All my life, you were a pebble on the side of the road. And now this? What did you do? Izuku stopped. He didn't look at Bakugo's face. He looked at the hand on the wall, noting the slight tremor. He could feel the heat radiating from it, could smell the faint scent of nitroglycerin. He slowly lifted his head, his cold, empty eyes meeting Bakugo's furious red ones. The hierarchy you understood is obsolete, Izuku said, his voice quiet, devoid of any emotion. It was a simple statement of fact. You are loud, inefficient, and your ego is a tactical liability. Your reliance on a single, unsubtle application of your quirk makes you predictable. He paused, letting the words sink in, watching as Bakugo's rage was slowly extinguished by a dawning, horrified comprehension. You are not a threat, Izuku concluded, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You are a minor obstacle. Stay out of my way. He didn't shove past. He didn't raise his voice. He simply took a half step to the side and continued walking, leaving Bakugo frozen against the wall. The words had struck him harder than any punch ever could. Deku hadn't just insulted him. He had assessed him. He had analyzed him, judged him, and dismissed him as irrelevant. It was a complete and utter dismantling of his entire worldview. For the first time in his life, Katsuki Bakugo wasn't angry. He was terrified. The school day ended. Students chattered excitedly, making plans, forming friendships. Izuku walked through them, a ghost in their midst. He was heading for the gates when a familiar, booming voice called out, Midoriya Shonin. All Might, in his muscle form, stood there, a wide, strained smile plastered on his face. He gestured for Izuku to follow him to a secluded corner of the campus. When they were alone, he deflated with a puff of steam, his skeletal form slumping against the wall. Young Midoriya, he began, his voice laced with a desperate urgency. We need to talk. Your performance today, it was incredible. Your control, it's beyond anything I could have imagined. My control is adequate, Izuku replied, his tone flat. It can be improved. No, that's not what I mean. All Might coughed, a speck of blood appearing on his lips. It's your attitude. The way you look at your classmates, the things you said. A hero must be more than just strong. They must be a symbol. They must inspire hope. They must save people with a smile. He tried to stretch his lips into his signature grin, but in his gaunt form, it was a grotesque death's head grimace. Where is your smile, my boy? Where is the joy? Izuku stared at him, his expression unchanging. He thought of the warehouse, of the lessons carved into his skin, of the cold logic that now governed his every action. A smile is a facial expression indicating pleasure or amusement, he stated, as if reading from a dictionary. It serves no tactical purpose. My objective is not to inspire hope. Hope is a fragile, unreliable commodity. He took a step closer, his cold eyes locking onto All Might's horrified ones. My objective is to create order. Symbols are for a society that can afford hope. A society at peace. This society is not at peace. It's a society where villains can suffocate a child in broad daylight, while heroes wait for someone with the right quirk. This society doesn't need a symbol of peace. His voice dropped, becoming a low, chilling whisper that carried all the weight of his conviction, a conviction born on that rooftop and forged in Stain's fire. It needs a deterrent. It needs a reaper. All Might stared at the boy before him, at the stranger wearing his successor's face. The joy he'd hoped to see was gone, replaced by a terrifying, absolute certainty. The quirk he had passed on to save the world was now in the hands of someone who wanted to rule it through fear. He had tried to reignite a hero's spark, but all he could see now was the cold, unblinking eye of a gathering storm. And it was a storm of his own making. The room buzzed with an electric, palpable excitement. All Might, in his magnificent Bronze Age costume, stood before Class 1A, his voice booming with infectious enthusiasm. "I am here, coming through the door like a normal person," the students erupted. Gasps of awe, cheers of pure, unadulterated fandom. Kaminari gaped. "I can't believe it's really All Might." Kirishima clenched a fist, tears of manly appreciation in his eyes. "So this is what a top hero looks like." Izuku watched the spectacle, his expression a flat, unreadable slate. He observed his classmates' reactions, dilated pupils, elevated heart rates, flushed skin, a mass psychological response to a celebrity figure. He registered All Might's costume, not with awe, but with cold analysis. Bright, primary colors, designed for high visibility and to project an aura of non-threatening power. The smile is a key component of the brand identity. It's a marketing strategy, and a highly effective one. Welcome to the most important class at UA High. Think of it as Heroing 101. All Might bellowed, striking a dramatic pose. Here, you will learn the basics of being a pro and what it means to fight in the name of good. Let's get into it. Today's lesson. We'll pull no punches. He held up a card with a single, bold word, battle. The word sent a fresh jolt through the class. This was it. The real thing. And for that, you need these. All Might pressed a button, and numbered cases slid from the wall, containing their hero costumes. Get yourselves suited up, and meet me at ground beta. The changing room was a chaotic mess of excited chatter as the boys marveled at their new gear. Ida's was a suit of gleaming white armor. Kirishima's was a rugged, bare-chested affair. Minetta's looked ridiculous. Izuku found his case, number 13, and opened it. The design was one he had submitted, but it was a far cry from the goofy, long-eared jumpsuit he had scribbled in his old notebooks. This design was born from the harsh pragmatism of Stain's teachings. It was ruthlessly functional. The suit was made of a dark, forest green, tear-resistant synthetic fabric, reinforced with lightweight carbon fiber plates at the torso, shoulders, and shins. There were no bright colors, no flashy logos. The only hint of his past was the color, a dark echo of his hair. The most prominent feature was the mask. It wasn't the smiling grin of his childhood drawings. It was a solid black metal faceplate that covered the lower half of his face, fitted with a rebreather and a voice modulator. It was designed to dehumanize, to intimidate, and to conceal his identity. A dark hood, attached to the collar, could be pulled up to cast his eyes in shadow. The final touch was a pair of thick, steel-toed boots and reinforced gauntlets. It was not the costume of a hero. It was the uniform of an urban pacification unit. When he emerged into the light of ground beta, he was no longer Izuku Midoriya. He was a nameless, faceless instrument of force. The other students, resplendent in their colorful and unique costumes, fell silent as they saw him. His dark, utilitarian gear was a stark, ominous contrast to their hopeful designs. Uraraka, looking cheerful and a little goofy in her pink and black spacesuit-like costume, tried to break the awkward silence. "Whoa, Deku, I mean Midoriya. Your costume is, really intense." The name Deku still hung in the air, a ghost of a bygone era. She had tried using it as a term of encouragement, but now, looking at the intimidating figure before her, it felt utterly wrong. The voice that came from behind the black mask was distorted, a low, metallic monotone. It is designed for efficiency and psychological impact. No further explanation was offered. He turned away, his gaze sweeping over the mock cityscape of ground beta, already analyzing sight lines and structural weaknesses. All Might, trying to regain the room's buoyant atmosphere, launched into the explanation of the exercise. "We'll be splitting you into teams of 2, heroes versus villains. The villains will be guarding a fake nuclear weapon hidden somewhere in the building. The hero's job is to either capture the villains or secure the weapon within the time limit. The villains win if they protect the bomb or capture the heroes." He began drawing lots from a box. The pairings were announced. Uraraka found herself paired with the boy who made her skin crawl. Team A, Midoriya and Uraraka. Her heart sank. How was she supposed to work with him? He barely spoke, and when he did, it was like conversing with a robot. Then, the opposition was announced. And your opponents will be Team D. Bakugo and Ida. A wave of tension washed over the students. Everyone had seen the confrontation after the quirk assessment test. They knew the history between Midoriya and Bakugo was complicated. Now they were being pitted against each other. Bakugo's face stretched into a wide, predatory, and slightly unhinged grin. This was it. A sanctioned, one-on-one fight. A chance to reassert the natural order. A chance to beat the answers out of this new, terrifying Deku and prove, once and for all, who was superior. His hands began to pop and crackle with small explosions. All Might, despite his booming persona, felt a knot of dread. He had helped set up the pairings, hoping that a controlled battle trial with Ida as Bakugo's partner would temper the explosive boy's worst impulses. He'd hoped that pairing Midoriya with the kind-hearted Uraraka would force him to engage in teamwork, to show a glimmer of the hero he ought to be. Now, he feared he had just lit the fuse on a powder keg. "All right, Team D, you can head inside to prepare," All Might announced. "Villains, you have 5 minutes to set up your defenses. Then the heroes will infiltrate." As Bakugo and Ida walked towards the building, Bakugo's fiery gaze was locked on Izuku. It was a promise of violence. Izuku met the stare, his own expression hidden behind the black mask, but the stillness of his posture was more intimidating than any threat. He simply stood there, watching them go, his head tilting slightly as he analyzed Bakugo's gait, his posture, the frequency of the explosions popping in his palms. He was collecting data. Once they were inside, Uraraka turned to her partner, her voice trembling slightly. "So, do you have a plan? Bakugo seems really mad at you. He'll probably come right for you." Izuku unfolded a blueprint of the building, which All Might had provided. His gloved finger traced the lines, his modulated voice low and calm. "His emotional state is a predictable variable. It will be exploited. Your objective is primary, mine is secondary." "Huh? What does that mean?" Uraraka asked, confused. "I will be the distraction. He will engage me on sight. His focus will be singular. You will use this opportunity to locate the weapon. Ida will be guarding it. His quirk gives him high mobility, but he is a defensive fighter, not an ambush predator. He will stay with the objective." He looked up from the blueprint, the dark lenses of his hood fixed on her. "Your mission is to find the weapon. Do not engage Ida. Do not engage Bakugo. Your quirk is useful for mobility and bypassing obstacles, not for direct combat. Locate the weapon, report its position, and await further instructions. I will handle the opposition." The words were not a suggestion. They were a direct order. There was no room for debate. "No, what do you think?" He had analyzed the variables and issued a command. Uraraka felt a surge of indignation. "Wait, shouldn't we work together? That's the point of this exercise, isn't it? Teamwork? Teamwork is the efficient allocation of assets to achieve an objective," the metallic voice replied, flat and dismissive. "Our assets are as follows. You possess stealth and mobility capabilities. I possess superior combat capabilities. The most efficient allocation is for you to perform reconnaissance while I neutralize the primary threat. Attempting to fight alongside me would make you a liability I would have to protect, compromising my own combat effectiveness and the mission as a whole." She was speechless. He had just called her a liability to her face, with the same emotional investment as someone pointing out a smudge on a window. It was cold. It was brutal. And a small, humiliated part of her brain admitted, it was probably true. "Just find the weapon, Uraraka," he said, the use of her name a minor, calculated concession to secure her compliance. "That is your role. Fulfill it, and we will win." Before she could argue further, All Might's voice echoed from their earpieces. "Hero Team, you may begin." Izuku pulled up his hood, casting his eyes into complete shadow. He gave Uraraka a single, sharp nod and then melted into the shadows of the building's entrance, his movements utterly silent. Uraraka took a deep breath, her frustration warring with her fear, and followed him in, her heart pounding in her chest. The inside of the building was a labyrinth of sterile white hallways and blind corners. Bakugo had insisted on taking point, leaving Ida to set up a villainous defense around the bomb on the 5th floor. "Just stay out of my way, Four Eyes." Bakugo had snarled. "I'll handle the nerd. You just stand there and look shiny." Now he was stalking the halls, his senses on high alert, a feral grin plastered on his face. This was his element. The hunt. Every corner he turned, he expected to see him. He expected Deku to be cowering, to be setting some stupid, obvious trap. He was ready for a fight. He rounded a corner on the third floor and saw a flicker of movement at the far end of the hall. A flash of dark green. "DKU!" he roared, his voice echoing through the building. Without a second's hesitation, he blasted forward, his explosions propelling him down the hallway like a human missile. "I've got you now!" Izuku stood at the junction of two corridors, seemingly waiting for him. He was perfectly still. As Bakugo rocketed towards him, ready to unleash his signature right hook, Izuku made his move. It was not a dodge. It was not a block. It was something else entirely. Just before the point of impact, Izuku took a single, short step into the attack. He flowed under Bakugo's outstretched arm, his movements so fluid it seemed to defy physics. He was now inside Bakugo's guard, too close for another large explosion. Bakugo's eyes widened in shock, his attack sailing harmlessly past its target. In that same motion, Izuku's right hand shot out. It wasn't a punch. His fingers, empowered by a minuscule but precise burst of one for all, clamped down on the side of Bakugo's neck. A jolt, like a cattle prod, shot through Bakugo's body. Trapezius nerve strike. Bakugo's entire right side went numb. His arm, which had been winding up for another blast, fell limply to his side. A strangled gasp escaped his lips as his muscles spasmed uncontrollably. "Predictable," the modulated voice stated from right beside his ear. Enraged and disoriented, Bakugo spun, swinging wildly with his left hand. He wasn't aiming. He was just trying to create space, to blast this silent horror away from him. Izuku wasn't there. He had already moved, flowing around Bakugo like smoke. He used Bakugo's own wild, spinning momentum against him. As Bakugo turned, Izuku's hand shot out again, grabbing the back of the gauntlet on his good arm. He didn't pull. He guided. He twisted his body, using a classic jujutsu throw, and sent Bakugo hurtling face first towards the wall. Bakugo slammed into the concrete with a sickening thud, the air driven from his lungs. He was seeing stars. This wasn't a fight. He wasn't even landing a blow. He was being played with, manipulated like a puppet. In the monitor room, the mood was somber. The other students were watching in horrified silence. All Might was gripping the console, his knuckles white. "What's happening?" Kirishima whispered, his usual boisterous energy gone. "Bakugo can't even touch him. Midoriya isn't trying to beat him in a fight," Momo Yayorozu murmured, her brow furrowed in deep, analytical thought. Her creation quirk gave her an appreciation for complex systems, and she was watching a master at work. He's disassembling him. He's using Bakugo's own aggression and momentum to systematically take him apart. Every move Bakugo makes, Midoriya is 3 steps ahead. Todoroki Shoto, who had been watching with quiet intensity, narrowed his heterochromatic eyes. He had seen raw power before. His father was the embodiment of it. But this was different. This was terrifying. This was not the application of power. It was the application of intellect, with power as a mere tool. Midoriya wasn't strong. He was dangerous. Back in the corridor, Bakugo pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest, his mind a cauldron of fury and humiliation. "You bastard!" he screamed, his voice raw. He raised his left gauntlet, the one that was still functional. He remembered the explanation from the costume department. These gauntlets stored his nitroglycerin like sweat. He could unleash it all in one massive, concentrated blast. "Don't do it, young Bakugo!" All Might's voice screamed in his earpiece. "You'll kill him. You'll bring the whole building down." But Bakugo wasn't listening. His vision was tunneled. All he could see was the calm, hooded figure standing 20 feet away. He was going to wipe that infuriating composure off the face of the earth. He pulled the pin. Izuku had already anticipated it. He had analyzed the gauntlets the moment he'd seen them. Large, cylindrical containers. Accumulation-type support gear. High yield, single-shot potential. A weapon of last resort for a user with a fragile ego. The moment Bakugo's hand moved to the pin, Izuku was already in motion. He didn't run away. He ran towards a perpendicular hallway. A torrent of incandescent fire erupted from Bakugo's gauntlet, a massive explosion that tore through the building. The wall was vaporized. The floor buckled. The entire structure groaned in protest. The hallway was filled with a deafening roar and a wave of superheated air. When the smoke cleared, Bakugo was panting, his arm trembling from the recoil. The hallway before him was a smoldering ruin. But Izuku was gone. Is he okay? Uraraka's panicked voice came over the comms. She had found the bomb room on the 5th floor, just as Izuku had predicted, and had been frozen in place by the sound of the explosion. A moment of static, and then the calm, modulated voice replied, "Threat neutralized. Position secure. Maintain observation on Ida. Do not engage." Bakugo spun around. Izuku was standing behind him, untouched. He had used the explosion as cover, circling around through the adjoining corridors with a burst of speed while Bakugo was blinded by his own attack. He was completely unharmed, not even a scorch mark on his dark uniform. Bakugo's face was a mask of disbelief, which quickly curdled back into rage. He charged, a desperate, screaming tackle. This time, Izuku didn't bother with nerve strikes. The time for lessons was over. It was time to end it. He met the charge head-on. Just as Bakugo was about to connect, Izuku dropped low and pivoted. His right arm shot out, not in a punch, but in an open-handed strike aimed at Bakugo's side. At the same time, his left hand grabbed Bakugo's right arm. With a sharp, brutal twist of his body, he applied pressure in two opposite directions. There was a sickening, wet pop. Bakugo screamed. It was not a scream of rage. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated agony. His right shoulder had been dislocated, ripped from its socket with clinical precision. The pain was blinding, white-hot, and absolute. He crumpled to his knees, clutching his now useless arm, his face pale and slick with sweat. Izuku stood over him, a dark, silent specter. He looked down at the whimpering, broken form of his childhood rival and tormentor. There was no triumph in his posture. No satisfaction. Only the cold, quiet finality of a task completed. "This is the difference between a hero and a rabid dog," the metallic voice stated, low and cold. "A hero controls the battlefield. You just bark and bite at anything that moves. Your aggression is your weakness. You were defeated before the first blow was thrown." He pressed a button on his gauntlet. "Uraraka. The primary threat has been neutralized. I am proceeding to the objective." He turned, leaving Bakugo writhing on the floor, his screams echoing in the ruined hallway. He didn't even bother to apply the capture tape. Bakugo was no longer a factor. He was broken. On the 5th floor, Ida was in a state of high alert. He had heard the explosion and Bakugo's subsequent scream. He had been trying to get a status report, but there was only silence from his partner. He was playing the role of the villain to the best of his ability, striking maniacal poses and delivering booming monologues to the empty room. "Aha! The heroes will never defeat me, the great villain Ida. My defenses are impenetrable, your defenses are inadequate." The voice came from directly behind him. Ida yelped and spun around, his engines revving in panic. Midoriya was just there. He had made no sound. No footsteps. He had appeared from the shadows like an apparition. "And Midoriya?" Ida stuttered, dropping his villainous persona. "How did you get here?" "The north stairwell was compromised by your partner's undisciplined use of his quirk," Izuku's modulated voice explained calmly. "It created a structural instability on the 4th floor, which blocked the primary access route. I used the external fire escape. You failed to account for it in your defensive strategy." Ida stared, dumbfounded. He hadn't even thought of that. He struck a pose, trying to regain his composure. "No matter. You shall not pass. My superspeed will prevent you from ever touching this weapon." He prepared to dash, to become a blue and white blur that Midoriya could never hope to catch. "Your quirk is linear," Izuku stated. "It requires a runway to reach maximum velocity, and has a wide turning radius. In a cluttered environment such as this, its effectiveness is drastically reduced. Before Ida could even process the words, Izuku moved. It was not a charge. It was a single, explosive step, closing the 15-foot distance between them in an instant. Ida's eyes widened. He couldn't react in time. Izuku's hand shot out, not for the bomb, but for Ida's leg. He grabbed the armored calf, just above the engine exhaust. A controlled 5% burst of power pulsed through his grip. The sound of crunching metal filled the room as the armor plating around Ida's calf crumpled like a tin can, seizing the moving parts of his engine within. Ida cried out in surprise and pain, stumbling as one of his legs became a dead weight. His primary weapon, his speed, was gone. He was helpless. Izuku calmly walked past the hobbled Ida, his metallic boots echoing in the silent room. He placed a hand on the papier-mâché surface of the nuclear weapon. Hero Team wins, his distorted voice announced to the silent observers. In the monitor room, no one moved. No one cheered. They had just witnessed a masterclass in terror. They had watched a boy systematically and psychologically dismantle one of their strongest classmates, then clinically disable the other, all without taking a single scratch. The fight had not been a battle. It had been an execution. All Might finally found his voice, forcing the usual boom into it, though it sounded strained and hollow even to his own ears. The Hero Team. Wayans, as Izuku and Uraraka, who had nervously entered the room after the fact, met the others downstairs. The atmosphere was thick with fear and awe. The medics were already wheeling a pale, shivering Bakugo out on a stretcher, Recovery Girl muttering about reckless quirk usage and dislocated joints. All Might forced himself to begin the post-match analysis. So, can anyone tell me who the MVP of this match was? Silence. No one wanted to answer. How could they? Finally, Momo Yayorozu raised a trembling hand. It was Midoriya, sir. And why is that, young Yayorozu? She took a deep breath, her voice shaky but clear. Because he was the only one who truly embodied his role. Ida was a step behind, and Bakugo was driven entirely by a personal grudge. Uraraka was sidelined, but Midoriya, he was flawless. He analyzed the enemy's psychological weaknesses, the structural layout of the building, and his partners' and opponents' quirks. He formulated a perfect strategy that played to his strengths and exploited everyone else's weaknesses. The battle was won before he even stepped into the building. It was terrifying, but it was perfect. Her words hung in the air, a chilling epitaph for the battle. Izuku stood at the back of the group, his hood down now, his mask off. His face was a calm, neutral canvas. He listened to Yayorozu's analysis and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She had understood. She was an asset. All Might looked at Izuku, at the boy who should have been his shining successor, the next symbol of peace. But there was no peace in those cold green eyes. There was only the chilling, silent promise of an order enforced by pain and fear. The battle trial was over, but the reign of the student they were beginning to whisper about in the halls, the one they called the Oni, had just begun.